Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the first chapter in the book of Acts. The book of Acts, more formally known as the Acts of the Apostles, is unique as far as New Testament books are concerned. It is a category or genre of one. It's the only classified historical work in the New Testament. So what becomes before them are the Gospels. This is the biography from the life and the pre-existence in John's account to the death of the Messiah. These are four windows from four authors, those who knew him either intimately or secondhand, who recorded the doings of his life. And then we read Acts, which is the history of the early church up to the 30 year. So where it ends off is with Paul en route to his trial for Rome. So a lot happened after that year. That was approximately 62 AD. So, for instance, the persecution in Rome, which claimed Peter and Paul's life by 67 BM, that began in 66 AD, rather. But also the destruction of the temple in 70 AD was a huge event that came after this. And the period of the New Testament really ends in the year 96. That's when John, the last living apostle, wrote the final capstone book of the New Testament. That's also a category of one. It's the only genre, strictly speaking, that's prophetic. And in between Acts, we have the genre of the letters. Much of what we read in Acts shapes the letters. We read of the adventure and the experience of Paul and his missionary companions. He wrote 13 of the New Testament books. But in the Old Testament, we earlier mentioned there are 17 works classified as historical. They have a wider window. They have from creation itself to the post-exilic period, the restoration period. The New Testament is a narrower chronological window, but a lot did happen in those years. They were perhaps the most exciting time to be alive because literally the world would be turned upside down and never be the same again. And to be a part of that would have been a story worth telling. And we read much of the stories here. So even though I earlier mentioned that it ends in 62 AD, it really begins in the year 29 AD, because little known fact, the Messiah was actually born 4 years before we historically date our calendars as 1 AD. So he lived to be 33 years old, died in 29. We witness him here in resurrected form, giving his parting message to his disciples and by connection us to posterity. So the book of Acts, it never really ends, because we read in the 8th verse, we are commanded, the Great Commission, Luke's version. We're going to discuss that more fully. We're commanded to take the gospel to the ends of the earth, and this message has not been to every end of the earth. So the work is never finished. It's always done, but it all began here. So the opening verse of the opening chapter, this first account I made, O Theophilus, of all that Yahshua began both to do and to teach. That first account would have been the Gospel of Luke, who is the author of the book of Acts, and he was a physician, Gentile, uniquely amongst authors of works of canonized scripture. And he was a diligent historian who did not know Yahshua firsthand, but he knew people who did know him, and he was a diligent inquiry, and he made these list of facts. Now, the addressee of the book, Theophilus, we read that name also in the opening verses of Luke's Gospel, which records the things he did and taught. So this is a biography of his church. But Theophilus, it could be an individual. The name translates as lover of God, or it could be a universal. And I prefer to endorse the latter, even though it could have been to an individual. I think it's important to stress that even though everything in Scripture is not written to us, it is very much written for us. So this is any lover of God. If you love God, if you want to know more about him, this is the book, a book within the book to take that quest to the next stage of satisfaction. Until the day when he was taken up, after giving instructions to the Ruach Kadesh, to the apostles whom he chosen. So this is his last day in resurrected form. He spent, after living 33 years in the flesh, born as a baby, matured all the way up to the grown man, where he died at the age of 33, but he appeared in resurrected form for a period of 40 days after they had killed him on the cross, thus conclusively validating his claim to be divine and the Messiah. But he appeared intermittently, so the disciples came across him throughout this time. He was not with everyone at once or everywhere at once. He was not bound by time, space, or any physical locations. He just vanished, and this is his last appearance. He's giving them the final instructions, and it's through the Ruach Kodesh who we're actually going to meet beginning in the Acts. So if the Old Testament, Yahweh is the divine protagonist, and the New Testament, Yahshua is the protagonist, beginning in the book of Acts, the Ruach Kodesh becomes the divine protagonist, and he was appointed by the second men. So we witness the first member of the Godhead, Yahweh the Father, second member, Yahshua the Son, third member, Ruach Kodesh, and so they collectively form the Trinity. And he's officially passing the torch, because after he ascends to the heaven, the Spirit is sent to the earth. To whom he also presented himself alive after his suffering by many infallible proofs, being seen by them for 40 days, speaking concerning the kingdom of Elohim. So Luke mentions much of what I mentioned earlier. It was a period of 40 days. This came he was resurrected after the crucifixion, so his suffering, they thought they killed him, but they didn't, because he is eternally alive, and the death, grave, sin, and Satan have no seal on him. He is the conqueror of them, and his conquest becomes ours vicariously. But the word infallible proofs, this is Luke, remember, is a doctor, so he would have had a scientific mind. An infallible proof means that it is beyond dispute. It's conclusive, empirical, verifiable evidence that there was some 500 witnesses who swore by their life, and most of whom were willing to die for the truth. So no one dies for a lie, and these were the men who carried the story of the resurrection, which is the foundation of the church's growth and its continuation. In meeting with them, he commanded them to not leave Jerusalem, but to wait for the promise of the Father, which you have heard from me. So he's telling them to stay put. He's going to leave. It's going to be a period of 7 days, during which time they're going to be waiting for his successor to come. So this all aligns with the Jewish calendar, because he was killed on the festival of the Passover, and that is significant because the Passover typologically alludes to him. And then for a period of 40 days, he spent 3 days in the grave, 40 years, and then 50 days later is the festival of Pentecost. We touch on that in the second chapter. And that marks the beginning of the baptism of the Spirit, which is the promise he alludes to in the next verse. Because John truly baptized in water, but you shall be baptized in the Ruach Kodesh, not many days from now. John the Baptist also said something identical, parallel, and similar. He said that he baptized with water. Water is symbolic of repentance, but it's only symbolism. It's our public declaration that we have committed our life on a new path. We are henceforth, now and forever Christians, or at least ideally, that is how one should enter into baptism. But I'm personally of the opinion that water baptism is not necessary for salvation, but the baptism of the Spirit is absolutely essential. That is the greater baptism, the baptism of fire, because the Ruach Kodesh appeared as fire, and they manifest in cloven tongues. So not many days from now, it would be 7, because the festival of Pentecost is so named because the Greek term pente is 50. So it took 50 place after the Passover. And remember, 3 days in the ground, 40 days resurrected, 7 days intermittent period. But what happens after that 7 days is going to rock not only the apostles' world, but the world itself. So when they had come together, they asked him, saying, Master, would you at this time restore the kingdom of Israel? So they still, even while he was alive, even to the tail end in the flesh with them in physical form, they harbored this notion that the Messiah's purpose was to come and restore Israel to national liberty, although he did clearly enunciate that his kingdom is not of the earth. But he's also, they are referring to the second coming. That's actually going to make sense with what I have to say in the verse which comes after this. So the kingdom is the concept of the reality. It is a concept now, but it will be a reality in the next dispensation, the millennial kingdom, when the earth will literally become his kingdom. The earth will return to the control of its rightful owner, because he co-created the cosmos, and he will rule in perfect justice for 1,000 years on the earth, after which time Satan will be let loose for a period to do his work. And even though those who had benefited from his righteous rule for 1,000 years, some of them are going to be led away, and that's just the divine plan. We're not to question that, and it's not appropriate for us to presume, to speculate as to the divine timetables. And he said to them, "It is not for you to know times or seasons, which the Father has put into his own authority." So in the Gospels, in his own life, he told them this is a similar statement in the Mount Olivet Discourse, with Matthew 24:36, where he tells them that he knows not the day of his hour, only the Father in heaven knows. But even if he does know at this point, he's not, because he being in resurrected form, that might have changed when he ceased being human. But it's you can speculate all you want, and the apostles lived with the perpetual expectation that he was going to return in their time. And tragically, that fire has sort of died out. So most Christians have lived their life since without the hope and expectation. And I know I'm told not to speculate as to the time, but it's my personal opinion that it is 150 years around the corner tops. And I know it seems like the world can't get much wickeder, but it can and it will. And the signs are here. Anyone familiar with the end time prophecies in this book, familiar with what's going on in the world today, can see the revelation unfolding right before our eyes. So no man knows the day or the hour, but we do know the season. And I'm personally, sincerely of the opinion that the season is now. I can hear his footsteps around the corner. I'm telling you, it's getting close, but I could be wrong. And but I'm convinced that with the hindsight and foresight of prophecy, that we don't have much longer. This earth as we know it is not going to be around for a whole lot longer. He's gonna come in his power and might, and a lot of things are going to change. But the 8th verse is really not only the key verse of this chapter, but perhaps the book of Acts itself, because it establishes the trajectory. So in the order of the outline of where he says, we'll just read it. "But you shall receive power when the Ruach Kadesh has come upon you, and you shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judah and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." So in the concentric circles of which mark the spread and destination of this message, it begins in Jerusalem. This takes place throughout the first 7 chapters in the book of Acts. Then Samaria, that's Samaria and Judah, is sort of 8 and 9, chapters 8 and 9. Then the ends of the earth really begin with the conversion of the Gentile centurion, Cornelius, by Peter, and then Paul really takes it to the end of the earth. He kind of replaces Peter as the human protagonist in the 13th chapter, but the divine protagonist is the Spirit. He's the one who made it all happen, and that is they're going to receive the power of the promise, the one who he had sent, and through his power and his animation and his activity and his ministry, they are going to be enabled to be effective and worthy witnesses, not only where they stood, but literally to the end of the earth. And there is, they did reap a monumental harvest field, but the work is never finished. We have to take it to the end of the earth. We cannot look at this as history, although it is in the genre of history, but the Great Commission is alive and well in every generation to every person. There is no expiration date on its mandate. We have to take it wherever we are, and eventually that will be the end of the earth, because the times are not going to come until this message has been preached to the end of the earth. To tie it into the 7th verse. And having said this, while they were looking on, he was taken up, and a cloud hid him from their sight. This is what is known as the ascension. So we commonly refer to the life, the death, the burial, the resurrection, but there's also the ascension. So when he appeared in resurrected form, he was the first fruit of the resurrection. He gave us a preview of what we could expect. So he had a perfect human body, and our resurrected bodies are promised to be perfect in the sense that they are designed to physically withstand the time of eternity. But really his power begins for us, and he is with his ascension. So he ascended to the right throne of the Father, the position of proximity of authority, as having done the mission that he was done, and he exists there now as our interceder for prayer. He's the one who takes our prayer to the Father when we offer it in his name, and our advocate. So he advocates for us. He is our high priest. He sympathizes with our weakness, and he advocates on our behalf to get the Father to accept us in him. And as they were gazing into the heavens as he went up, see, 2 men stood by, dressed in white. Now, these were probably angels dressed in white. We witnessed people similarly described at the empty tomb of the Resurrection Sunday. Mary, the first one who came there, thought that, what have you done with his body? But they are so these are angels instructing them. So he is gone. He is never to be seen again, at least until they die and meet him up there. But for all intents and purpose, his existence on the earth as a human, the word incarnate, is henceforth, now and forever complete. So after this point, this marks the beginning, the transition between the Gospels, which are his biographical details. This is just the tail end. And then after here, it becomes the biography of the apostles, not strictly speaking a biography, but they are the main human protagonist at this point. Who also said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking up into the heavens? This same Yahshua, who was taken up from you into the heavens, shall come in the same way as you saw him go into the heavens. So they are told what to expect when this blessed expectation, this is his second coming. That's the thing they live for. That's the thing we are to live for. And so once he having ascended, he was going to come down the same way. The opposite of the ascension is the condescension. And when we think of this in human terms, we think someone who's derogatory. So a human being condescending has a negative connotation, but the divine theological connotation is him. Because what does someone do when they condescend? They look down their nose. So it's a direction in motion downward. And to condescend from divinity is not an act of arrogance, but in fact humility, one that we'd do well to imitate. And the fact of this ought to instill in us the proper humility. And so what I want to close with is that the promise is alive and well. So what was true for them remains true for us. One, we do have to we have to carry the torch and run the race that's been run for 2,000 years before us. But we also have the same promise of the Spirit, and apart from him, no effective evangelism or growth or any worship is worthy of the one we offer it to. So I hope that's the reason you're here. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Take care until then. Bye-bye.